Right, how did you first start in the writing profession?
I was writing when I was at school, I suppose, 9, 10 years old. I was fortunate in that that was the one thing that I wanted to do more than anything else. I'd loved composing little letters and writing articles, so from being very young. And then at 9, 10, 11, I decided that that was the profession that I wanted. And I began writing for any magazine that would publish me. Parish magazines. I remember I had a friend at school who was very keen on racing pigeons. Now, I knew nothing about racing pigeons, but this magazine that he used to bring to school each week was one of the few magazines I can remember seeing at the time which actually said contributions from readers will be welcome. So, helped by him, I learned a few things about racing pigeons, wrote a few articles which they used, didn't pay me for them, needless to say. Encouraged by that, I would submit material anywhere. I mean, any subject that I thought would be of interest, I would turn in pieces for, as I say, local newspapers, local magazines, national magazines. Literally anywhere. And, you know, there was some were accepted, some weren't. It confirmed in my own mind that that was the profession that I wanted. When I left school at 17, I had the advantage, when I went to get a job in a local newspaper, of having had material published. So instead of just saying I want to write and showing them school essays marked brilliant by an English teacher, I could actually say, you know, that I've appeared in the Pigeon Weekly, Titbits, Ravalli, the West Essex Gazette, whatever the paper was. And I found it was a great help. And indeed, you know, when I talk to young people who want to go into the writing profession, I often say the best open sesame to any profession you can have, so this particular profession you can have, is to show them how keen you are by the fact that you've tried it. You know, I mean, even if 90% of the pieces you've written have been refused, but 10% have been published, that's better than 100. You know, never having done anything at all, but just saying you want to do it.
Yes.
And that's really how it started. I worked on a local newspaper. I spent 3-4 years on that. Moved up to London, worked on a magazine. Moved from magazines into book publishing. Yeah. That's probably jumping ahead. Well, that's the basic.
Yeah. But your True Mysteries books, how far did you have to elaborate them to make them interesting? And did you actually believe in every single one? Or were you just sort of made to write them?
No, the choice of the stories that I was using was all totally mine. I would say that there was an element of truth in every story that was used in the series. Elaborated there certainly are, because like any storyteller, you want to carry the reader along with you. And if you just repeated the facts as they had come to light, I think it would make for a pretty uninteresting story. Yeah. So, you obviously elaborate and you obviously highlight certain things. There was very little that was totally invented in any of the stories. I think there may have been the odd piece of conversation which was slightly elaborated. But the basis of all the stories was true. In some cases, I'd spent quite a lot of time researching the actual stories, and would like to have. There wasn't quite enough to make them a full-length book, but there was certainly enough to make them good stories. And a number of the tales that I actually used in the books were sort of starters, in other words, for possible elaboration at some later stage, because the one interesting thing that I found about these books, apart from the interest that there was with from readers, was the number of people who would say, yes, I know about that story, and this happened to me, or that happened to me, or did you know about this? So quite a number of the cases I got quite substantial files of extra material, which one day might make a full-length book.
So after that, how did you actually get involved with the Doctor Who books? How did they get there?
Well, Bob Tanner, who is the managing director of W.H. Allen, was a colleague of mine when I was in book publishing 15 years ago. and he and I have been friends, both personally and professionally, for a number of years. And I'd done a number of books for him before. And he literally rang me up one day and said, would you come and have lunch? I've got an idea I'd like to talk to you about. I think it's something you'd enjoy doing. And we went to lunch, and he said, you know, have you ever watched Doctor Who? I said, yes, I remember William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton. I said, my children have been interested in the subsequent Doctors. I said, my oldest son watched John Pertwee and a bit of Tom Baker. I said, my young daughter now is picked it up with Peter Davison and Colin Baker. He said, well, it's the 20th anniversary coming up a year's time, so you can back up how far that was. We're going to do a big sort of celebratory volume. You know, I'd like you to do it. And I said, oh yes. And I, you know, have to be honest about it, I wasn't overstruck with the idea. And I said, well, why particularly me? Surely, you know, there are lots of people around who are sort of very heavily into Doctor Who, because I certainly wouldn't claim to be that. And he said, well, that's exactly why we don't want people who are very heavily into Doctor Who to do it. We feel that this is a book that should not only appeal to the hardcore enthusiast, but somebody who just watches the programme, not necessarily every time it's on, but from time to time, and is interested in it and would like to know a bit more about it. People in their 40s who remember the first Doctors, right down through the years. So it's got to appeal to a whole broad spectrum. He pointed out that unlike anything they'd ever done before, which had been very much the sort of paperback novelisation, this was going to be a big gamble for them. It was obviously going to be much more substantial than that. It was going to be a hardback. And he said, although there were lots of very good Doctor Who writers around, he didn't feel that was right for this particular book. So I said, okay, well, you know, let me think about it. Let me just see whether I feel that I can do it. It's something that will be worthwhile. Give me some sort of idea of you know, are we going to use colour in it? Is it going to be, you know, these sort of things are very important. In other words, am I going to have 20,000 words to play around with, or am I going to have 50 or 60,000? He said, no, there'll be colour in the book. You can have as many words as you like. You can be as substantial. You can draw in as many people as you like. So I thought, fine. I came home and thought about it. One of the first problems as such that I could foresee was, because I had a fair bit of experience of writing books to do with television series and films and what have you, I could foresee, because the programme had lasted for so long, I might be running into a lot of sort of ego situations. In other words, actor B would say, well, of course I was the one who made it famous. Another one would say, no, it was me. And I was sort of slightly concerned about that. Anyhow, just to sort of put it all in a nutshell, I came home and I discussed it with the family, and they all said, well, why don't you do it? It could be a lot of fun, you know. And it's obviously got the blessing of the BBC and the people involved. So I got back to Bob and said, okay. I had lunch with John Nathan Turner, and we sort of got on very well together, and he promised all the cooperation. He said, I'm sure that, you know, various doctors and what have you will help you. So, you know, I agreed to do it, and it was one of the greatest pleasures to find that, in fact, the people who'd been connected with it over the years, right the way through, I mean, Bill Hartnell, of course, was dead by then, but his wife Heather was still alive then. The response that I got from everybody when I contacted them and telling them what I was doing was absolutely marvellous, and there wasn't a single person who said, well, you must forget what everybody else said, I was the one who was responsible. All of them said, it was a part of my life, I'm very grateful for what it did for me and what happened. And this was right from Verity Lambert through to, you know, to Peter Davison, who was the current Doctor then. So that my misgivings were sort of totally pushed aside. I mean, it proved to be an enormously pleasant thing to do. And the greatest pleasure of all was not only the tremendous success which the book achieved, which you obviously know all about, but the nice response that I got from both hardcore fans, in other words, the people who knew more about it than I could ever hope to know, who said, you know, you've taught, there are things I've learned in this that I didn't know about. I found that very gratifying. Just as from somebody else who said, I've watched this programme on and off in the years, I didn't realise there was so much to it, you know. And indeed, looking back on my own early misgivings, it didn't really take very long for me to realise that anything that had lasted 21 years had to have a fair bit of substance to it. It wasn't just, it was something that really had a marvellous secret to it, and that, again became fairly evident in this marvellous idea of a central character who you can change. You can't imagine Coronation Street changing any character in that, and the audience accepting it. It was a superb idea, and that sort of magic had rubbed off on all the people. And it was a far more joyous thing to have done than my initial feelings were. And maybe that was why the book was so successful. Maybe none of that came through.
Yeah. Briefly, how did you go about producing the Celebration book? I mean, were you given a format, or were you just told to?
Oh no. I mean, this was part of the attraction of what Bob Tanner said. Not that I'm going to tell you the way to do it. I want you to do it the way you think will work. So obviously there was a fair bit of toing and throwing. And the final format stands or falls by the way that I did it. I wanted particularly to have a section in that encapsulated everything that had gone on. Now, I obviously didn't want to duplicate the L'Officier died, which was already out by then, which was one of the reasons why I got Jeremy Bentham involved as an expert from way back, and he was enormously helpful on the book all the way through. And Ian Levine as well, who also showed me a lot of his films. And I felt that it was important to have these little sort of encapsulated pieces about all the stories that appeared over the years, and I discussed this at some length with Jeremy. I said, I don't want to just tell the stories again, but can we tell what was going on behind the scenes? In other words, was there some strange thing happen? Did they lose days of filming? Did they have trouble with this monster? Did such and such not work? So that's why we devised that particular format for that, so that in those little entries you've not only got the 4 or 5 lines on what the story's about, but you've also got any interest in this is the first time colour was used, or this was the first time whatever was used, those things. As far as the Doctors was concerned, it was fairly straightforward. I mean, it was basically, I wrote biographical pieces about them as people, and then they contributed their own particular recollections, and then I obviously approached certain people who've been important to the series over the years. And I think, looking back on it, the thing that probably gave me the greatest sort of boost very early on when I'd agreed to do it, before having made contact with anybody apart from John Nathan Turner, was the instant response that I got from Verity Lambert, who at that time had just taken over as the top woman in the sort of EMI industry, was very high powered, and had obviously was great little pressure on her time, and she literally gave up a whole of an afternoon to sit and talk and discuss everything, and call up people and saying, I've met Peter Haining and he's doing this book, I'd appreciate it if you'd help him, and so on. That was a marvellous sort of kick into the whole thing, and everything else sort of fell into place after that. And what transpired invariably with something like that, I ended up with far more material than I could possibly use, So I had then to start honing down and hoping that I wouldn't sort of hurt anybody, but giving this sort of whole balanced picture of the phenomenon. And when it was finished, I mean, I thought, well, that's it. I don't think I want to do any more on Doctor Who, but rather like the series itself, it doesn't work out that way. And W.H. Allen was so pleased with the result of that I got another call from Bob Tanner and another extremely good lunch, and said, I want you to do another one. And again, I said, well, I'm not going to rewrite the same book again. That would be a real rip-off, He said, but really, I think, it's so good, we'd like you to do another one. Fair enough. As a professional writer, as I explained to you early on, you don't say no to anything. You go away and think about it. And as I mentioned in the book, which you probably see, I just suddenly saw this picture of Patrick Troughton looking at the diary, 500-year diary, and said, that's it, that's what I'll do. That's the key to time,
Your books have obviously all been about the making of the series so far. Do you actually harbour a desire to novelise a television script or something along those lines?
I've got one more book to do for them. I said this after the first book to an interviewer and was made to look an idiot. I said after the first one there wouldn't be another. I said after the second one there wouldn't be another. Now I've committed to doing a third. I honestly don't think so. No. I have very much enjoyed the freedom that I've had with the 2 books that I've done, and equally the freedom that I've got with the 3rd book, to do it my way, if you like. You know, they're saying, you know, we want you to look at it. So I've got the challenge of setting something up which is fresh, so the reader won't turn and say, well, I've read all this before. I mean, obviously there's going to be an overlap. You can't avoid that. But at least somebody will say, well, the key to time isn't a rewrite of Celebration, and I hope the 3rd book will return and say, well, it's a rewrite of the previous 3, because otherwise I really don't want to do that. I would rather say, those are the 2 books that I've contributed to the Doctor Who field.
Yeah.
That's it. You know?
Yeah.
And of course, because the series is so successful, we are, of WHL, and I'm finding that more and more of the writers are actually wanting to novelise their own stories, which I think is ideal. I mean, I think they should do.
Yes.
I think that is the best way, because they're the people closest to it, they understand it best. So I think probably the simple answer to that is no. But
did you work closely with Jeremy Bentham on the Celebration? Or were your contributions quite separate?
Oh no, well I mean the thing that he did specifically for me was what we were talking about earlier on. This was the whole chronology thing, describing the thing, and I just gave him a brief as to what I wanted, and I let him get away with it. He was, as I say, very helpful. I mean, in the early days when I was sort of finding my way through the minefields of the fans who wanted to talk to me for 5 days and not actually say anything specific.
Yeah.
You know, and well-meaning, for goodness sake. I wouldn't knock any fan. I mean, everybody has their own particular thing. But Jeremy was the most rational and the most objective, and of course, as you probably know, he's now doing his own book on the Doctor Who thing. People like that, and as I say, going back to this thing about the sort of genuine friendliness and enthusiasm, it wasn't just the people directly involved in the show, the actors, the producers, the writers. It was also certain of the fans, and as I would mention Jeremy particularly, and also Ian Levine, who were extremely helpful. Now, both of those 2 people could have said, well, you know, why wasn't I asked to do it? You know, you find out for yourself. But that was never the case. There was always the enthusiasm to help me put things right. And because, as I say, I set out with a layman's approach to it. I knew the series, but I would never have called myself a great expert. I mean, I probably know more than the average man in the street now because I've had to submerge myself in it.
You spoke earlier of wanting to know how many words to write in Celebrations. Did you actually have any say as to the general format of both books? The layout or whatever?
Oh yes. Once the book, with a bit like Topsy, it grew and grew and grew. I mean, in the initial stages of Celebration, we were talking about certainly a large format book, but probably 128 pages with maybe 16 pages of colour or something. But the more I got involved in it, the more interesting material I brought to light, the more I said to WHL, and this is a bigger book than any of us think, you know. If it's going to be done properly, this is the way it'll have to be done. And then once we reached the design stage, obviously I was very much involved in that, and we talked about how big the book would be, what pictures we would use, and yes, I was involved in that all, because I feel that not just as far as these 2 books are concerned, but any book that I do, I feel that the way the book looks is very important. In other words, when I've delivered my text and illustrations, that's not the end of it as far as I'm concerned. I like to see it all the way through, so that it's something that, at the end of the day, I think is as good as it can possibly be.
Was it out of interest? Was it your idea to have the TARDIS on that side?
No, it wasn't. I can't claim that. I mean, it was a lovely idea. No, it was Mike Brett, the art director of W.H. Allen. I mean, that was such an ambitious idea that, on reflection, I'm not sure I would even have suggested it, because it involved quite a lot of, quite a lot of things. But no, that was his idea. It was a very good idea. You know? In fact, the whole book looked superb. You know, I was very pleased with it, and still am very pleased with it. It's a very fine book. You know, lovely cover, lovely production. You know.
Is it actually has it been reprinted?
Oh, no. 7 or 8 times.
Oh,
yes.
I think. Yes, actually, I've got the second.
Yeah. Oh, it's done. I mean, if you want to be precise, I mean, ring W.H. Allen. I mean, it must be 7 or 8 times, I should think. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it never. As I say, the enthusiasm for the book and the sales really surprised me, because I mean, in the early days, I think when W.H. Allen told me they were thinking of printing about 10,000 copies. You know, that's a lot of books, as I'm sure you can appreciate, especially at $9.95 or whatever it was then. But in fact, it oversubscribed that before we'd even started. And then when the American market came, it became quite different. I mean, nobody was more surprised than I was. You know, although again, Jeremy Bentham, bless his heart, he said right from the word go, this will do far more than anybody anticipates. He was very well aware of what the book was all about, and what he was doing. He was proved to be absolutely right.
I know easy is a relative term, but which of the two you've written so far would you say was easiest to?
Oh, Keith Time was easier
Really?
because I knew what it was all very familiar. Very familiar is not the right word. I understood the whole thing. I had submerged myself so much. In fact, the family started talking to me of being a bit of a Doctor Who bore because such and such a thing would come, and I would quote some episode or some little story that had happened. And the book also developed, apart from, say, seeing this picture of Patrick Troughton and thinking that's a good way to do it. We can date everything that happened to him. We can show the dips, and read the book, so you know exactly what it does. There was also this vast amount of material that I'd collected that I couldn't use in Celebration. You see, so that was the, I know I'd got this material to hand that I could use.
Yeah. Could you tell us the supposedly vast Scottish readership of your third book you've written? Roughly what that's about.
Do you know, this is the first time I'm actually going to have to say no, I'd rather not. It's a principle that doesn't just apply to this book, but any book. I prefer not to talk about it before I'm doing it. I mean, it'll be different to the other two. I mean, that's not a very satisfying thing to say, I know. It will be different in approach to the other two. Otherwise I wouldn't be doing it, because you've heard what I've said earlier on. I wouldn't be rewriting the same thing. It'll be different in approach to the other two. The format, again, is very much of my own devising. But I don't really like talking about things until they're at an advanced stage. Because you set off too many wild hares. People expect one book and they get another. It's better to wait and see the finished book. I'm due to deliver it in the early part of next year, so that it can be published to coincide with the return of the series. And if you'll bear with me, that's all I'd really like to say about it at the moment.
Yeah. How do you feel about postponement's cancellation issue, Shani Doctor? Do you have any strong views on that at all? And if Doctor Who is axed, do you think, be called to write any more books on it?
I can understand the thinking behind what has happened. Having had some experience in television myself years ago, fashions do change. People in senior positions do like to gauge the strength of the enthusiasm for a series. The response that came to Michael Grade's announcement was such that I think left him in no doubt that there is a very strong feeling for the series, both in this country and America. So I don't think there's any doubt that it will come back. The enormous challenge that obviously faces John Nathan-Turner and Colin Baker is to produce something after the long gap of time that will excite not just all those that watch it at the moment, but an even larger viewing audience. I like to think that it'll actually be a boost to the series. It'll come back, and there'll be all new ideas, new things that they can put into it, which will rekindle interest in areas that there probably wasn't any interest before. So I think it'll turn out to be a bit of a mixed blessing. It was certainly a great surprise when it happened. I mean, nobody was more surprised than I was when I got the phone call to the Press Association to be told what had happened, what was planned, and my own immediate reaction was one of horror. But sometimes these things turn out to be a mixed blessing. It just makes everybody take breath and reassess. And I mean, it's worked for 21 years, and I'm sure it's got another 5, 10 years. I mean, again, you're dating ahead of it. I mean, the concept is such that it will accept virtually any change, and stay abreast of what is happening with people.
Would you advocate writing as a profession to anybody who is strongly opposed to doing that?
Very much so. I mean, it's very tough. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying to you right at the beginning of this interview. If you want to write, nobody is going to come to you and say, write. You've got to want to write yourself passionately. You've got to write over and over again and accept rejection, and it's no good asking other people to give you to give you markets. I mean, markets are there, but you've got to go out and find them. And as I say, in the early stage, even if it's only parish magazines and local newspapers, it's a step up the ladder. You've got to be very professional in your approach to writing. It's certainly in the fields in which I deal in. It is very important to deliver a book on time. If a book is going to be given, to go back to the Doctor Who thing, it would have been no good me delivering that manuscript so they could have published the book 6 months after the celebrations. I mean, that would have been pointless. It had to be, so I was on a very tight deadline. You have to have the discipline. You've got to have the drive to get to see people, to do the research, to push where sometimes people don't want to be pushed. And you've got to have an inner motivation to doing it. I mean, I was fortunate in that I started in journalism, went into publishing, and ultimately became a writer, full-time writer. So I was very well aware of the pressures of writing under for deadlines, as you do on a newspaper.
Yeah.
Having worked in publishing, I knew the requirements of a publishing house, which in many ways, I suppose, is one of the reasons why, plus the diverse number of subjects that I've done, why W.H. Allen came to me in the first place for Celebration, because that's what they needed. They needed something that would be on time, would hopefully hit all the markets that they wanted, which, in all modesty, I can say it actually did. And pleased everybody, or it seemed to do, certainly in terms of the sales it did achieve.
Yeah. As a writer, do you have to have an agent to join a union? Is it much like any other profession?
I can't answer that because I don't consider myself typical in that, having, as I say, worked in journalism and then in publishing, I have a lot of people who are friends in the business to whom those things are really sort of immaterial. I mean, Bob Tanner came to me because I knew him, and again, that's something that relationship was built up years ago. So I'm not really, a typical person to give you a judgment on that.
Yes. And lastly, what do you think is the best route for someone to follow, say, if he wants to be an actor? Roughly the same as what you've done, just to write for anything that's going?
I would think so, yes.
That's the best route to take.
Yes, I think it's determination, because anything that is worth having, the ultimate success of writing books and making a livelihood out of it, as I do today, I can trace back to the various things that I did over the years, going right back to those articles, writing little pieces for, say, parish magazines, a local newspaper, with no credit, no name on them, no nothing, just the satisfaction of seeing them in print, and building up step by step by step, and learning the profession as you go along, because unless you have the natural talent to write novels, for instance, the profession of becoming a writer is very much about the determination of marshalling your facts and putting words down on paper. I mean, I find that the actual writing of a book is the easiest part of it. It's the collecting of the material, of organising it and planning the way the book is going to go, which is the tough part. If you do that properly, the writing actually comes very easily. But then, I've been doing it for 30 years, so that probably, it's probably not an altogether fair answer. But
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure.